Hello there. Well, I was going to talk about geopolitics today, but my thoughts, I started thinking about it, and my thoughts led me on to something else. I was going to talk about all playing tricks on Putin, I think. Putin, a serious man, a stable man, a man, he seems to me, with a good head on his shoulders, a cold man, a steady man, a man, he seems to me, very much in control of himself and his feelings, a man with inner fortitude, I would say. And this is the sort of thing I want to talk about today. Of course, we have everyone else playing tricks. Many of them immoral men and hateful women, all those yellow-haired women looking all the same, banal and vulgar and silly and useless. They get angry. They think that's showing how firm they are. Silly women. I was almost going to say, can we please stop voting for women until the next generation? Get rid of all of them. They've all been infected with a certain ideology that hates men and hates women too. Although they call themselves feminists, taking the title from the first wave, the suffragettes. But I don't want to talk about that. I want to talk about real leaders and real leadership. In England, we have something going on with the Reform Party. I am not following all the ins and outs of the dispute between members of the party. I just want to remind you that I did say a long time ago, because I saw these 5 years ago, I promise you. I saw that it was not going to be the future, the answer. First, because I noticed immediately, I had been accepted, I told you this, I shared this with you 2 years ago, that I had been accepted as a candidate to stand for reform. And then and I said yes, and I was very glad. I went through the interviews and so on. And then very, very soon after that, I saw, first of all, that there was no geopolitical understanding. And then other things. And I decided that, no, this was going to be not what I had expected. So if you remember, at election time, I actually said, I spoke at length about this, and I said, I'm not going to vote for any of the three parties. I think we should all vote independent or something, whatever, because we have to give a little bit of a shake to the system. If we continue voting for either this party or the other party, nothing ever is going to happen. And I thought that a little bit of a shaking was called for, but anyway, it didn't happen. That's in England. In France, in France, I followed, I think I told you before, I follow one comedian, one French comedian. He's actually, it's not a lapstick comedian, it's a very satirical jester, the old jester speaking to the, to the king, the truth, but putting it in such a way that the king will not be offended. And I follow him. He has this guy, his name is Xavier Louis de Isara. And he has these videos that he puts on, and they're very watchable. They only go for about 4 minutes, 4 or 5 minutes. But in those 4 or 5 minutes, he says just about everything that I need. Even if I were to say what he says, I would need an hour and a half. He is very, very good. Very. So he's talking. He has a go at Macron for the all the time and other things. And so in this last one, he was saying to the French public, he was saying, "Don't worry. They are talking about taking us to war, but they're not going to take us to war," he says. I mean, they're just all these things about going to war, all that. They're just playing the flute, the pipe, the bagpipes, to put all the sheep to sleep, to hypnotize you. And then all these generals that come, the experts on television telling you about the need for war, with all those medals here, there, everywhere, all these medals. They are speaking, he says, with a forked tongue. with Macron, he says, he calls him Kekeros. It's like the fool, the show off more, the pink show off, and he puts his picture there with the military uniform, medals all over the place, but the uniform is pink, and he says, he believes that his gaze, just with his gaze, he will be able to push back a cosmic storm. He believes that by pointing the finger at the clouds, he'll stop the rain. And he goes on, he says, look, the war will not happen. It's just to scare people. It's just to scare you, to terrorize the weak, the suckers, the sheep, the pigeons, and off he goes. But then you see, he uses all that humor to then at the end always say something that struck me actually. He says, this is not the head of a nation in the noble sense of the term. They are not the heads of the nation in the noble sense of the word, of the term. He says he's the puppet of occult powers. He serves bankers and wealthy industrialists and transnationalists and shadowy financial powers who hold him, he says, who are holding him by his castanets. Castanets, he says. Anyway. And he ends up by saying, I can't say anymore, my friends, because you see, I can't tell you anymore because now in the social media, we are not allowed to. We can only amuse you. We can only entertain you. We can only clown around and horse around, but never can we educate. Never can we awaken you. Anyway, as I said, it's 4 or 5 minutes and he always brings a smile to my face. Okay, so that's France. In the US, in the US, I'm getting a little bit too exhausted with so much Trump all the time. I would like to hear more in detail about what Elon is finding in that den of corruption. But Trump, he's not able to say we've lost. Once again, NATO. So turning and turning around. Look, I think NATO has lost, the European Union has lost. They cannot face it, they cannot admit it, and they are dealing with it in different ways. Trump, I don't know whether he's knowingly or pretending to negotiate. I'm getting tired of it. But certainly turning the US, who was really the aggressor to begin with, if you take into account, the help and the aid with the coup in 2014, all that, okay. But it was a belligerent partner there. I mean, Ukraine would not have survived. We saw at the end that it was really NATO and the United States against Russia trying to weaken Russia and all that. We know that. So now for one belligerent party to turn and pretend to be the mediator, that does not make sense. The loser cannot be a mediator. Okay, never mind. I'm just feeling exhausted about it. What I want to say is that, and this is why I'm taking it away perhaps from geopolitics today, because I started thinking about it. And what I came to, the main thought is that our leaders are immature people, immoral and immature sociopaths. Most of them. I think that is why they have been chosen, they have been picked to be there, allowed to get to the top, sometimes almost suddenly, out of nowhere. We remember Obama, we remember Macron, now the Canadian one, Carney, is that his name? Was he the one who was in charge of the Bank of England? He's a globalist. And he's there, not one single vote from the population in his favor, but there he is. They become part of the picked, chosen. They become part of the pre-chosen and the predestined to serve and become part of that clique. What I want to talk about is something different, and that is that we are going to need a broad, united front to defeat a common enemy. Because we are now in the midst of a progressive dystopia. What's that? A society bereft of reason, where there is great suffering or injustice. I looked up the definition of dystopian. Dystopian, nightmarish, terrifying, gloomy, hellish, Orwellian, despotic, tyrannical, oppressive, repressive, dictatorial, totalitarian, authoritarian, autocratic, etc., etc. Let me tell you how we got here, a bit of history. How we got to this illusion of progress, an illusion of progress that is have taken us to neurosis, dystopia, and alienation. And this is the present world, the world of post-modernity, the world of deconstruction, that is, of throwing away any norms, values, traditions we all shared until yesterday. The world of globalism, too, a one world government run by corporations, where the Supreme Court is an investment fund. That is, money and profit are at the altar to which we are all called to worship. Hence the deconstruction of the nation states and values and traditions of all. But it didn't just appear all of a sudden in this century. This world in the West is the result and consequence of what has been going on, certainly for the last 250 years, preparing the ground. And now what we have is the ripe fruit of that modern age. And no, it is not that we have strayed from the path or got lost or took the wrong turn or we got here by accident. No. People did not stray by themselves. They were led. No, it wasn't an accident that led us here where we are, or a mistake to have reached this post-modernist, post-humanist era. But rather its logical conclusion of what began in the 16th century, took impetus in the 17th and 18th, and came just strolling along quite comfortably until the 20th, to be implemented now in the 21st. Now we are seeing it, bringing us here to this absolute nonsense and delirium, to liquid egos, as we said in some other time. I forget the name of the author who first used the word liquid egos, to diluted and fragmented nations. In politics and geopolitics, we talk about hard power, military, economic, direct power exercised directly, and soft power, cultural, sociological, psychological manipulations, etc., covert. There is another kind of power, dense power, mental alienation, a distancing from oneself in the individual, a not knowing of oneself. The average man in the so-called West is a wounded being, psychologically, spiritually, and I say spiritually, not necessarily here, just here in its religious sense, but wounded in the sense that he lives in a continuous state of unrootedness, if there is such a word, being uprooted, an individual not rooted, disconnected, lack of knowledge and awareness of the historical and anthropological processes that preceded him, disassociated from his tradition and his lineage. I don't talk about race, that is a 19th century political thing. I talk about, in the old Roman sense, lineage, or linked only in a very superficial, external way. And this unity and being rooted is a concept foreign to the philosophical coordinates of the Enlightenment, liberalism, socialism, fascism, all those. It has to do with that traditional worldview that establishes the following. And I'm going to use the old criteria here of archetypal ideas. They are part of the West, but also of the East, to help us interpret this, what is happening, what is in front of us, and we can see it with our own eyes if we care to look. Traditional doctrines of West and East established a hierarchy, traditionally, of first, at the top, so to speak, the spiritual and religious authority, followed by political military authority, followed by a third, the economic, the organizing authority, the one that is able to organize society to obtain prosperity and so on. And a fourth, the actual workforce that sustains everything else. And these 4 layers, as it were, spiritual, religious, political, military, economic, logistics, organization, and workforce, in the traditional worldview, work together. There is a symbiosis here, okay? It's an organic whole body, harmonious, without conflict in its parts. Well, outside of these 4 layers, let's say, is they would call it the pariah in the East. We use the word now meaning deviant, criminal, social pariah, but it really meant the outcast. In the East, it was viewed not in terms so much of class in the Marxist sense, but the one individual that depicts the lack of, the shortage, the deficiency. That is, if we can adapt this to the West mentality, an individual in a continuous state of negation, anxiety, lack of center, lack of principle, lack of purpose, lack of rootedness, lack of connection, lack of attachment. And this is the individual with the wounded soul, unfocused, unanchored. They leave floating about. We are now in the age of the wounded. And I'm not going on a tangent here. I'm pointing out that this progressive dystopia, the world of post-modernity, can be measured by the disaster it has caused and by what it generates: depression, anxiety, insomnia, sectarianism, fanaticism, stupidity, vulgarity. The last man, Nietzsche called him, the one whose only aim in life is to be content, like a pig, and never is. There he is in his physical, mental, spiritual basement. Alexander Dugin, the Russian philosopher, says that the West is now not in post-modernity anymore, but in post-humanity. We have arrived to the archetypal type of post-humanity. We are here. We have arrived here, as I said, not by chance, not because we've taken a detour. This is the logical conclusion where we have ended up, the ripe fruit of the modern age. So against that, what do? Raise the white flag? Sit down and die? Leave post-humanity, this era of post-humanity, for our children and grandchildren without doing anything? No, we have to create, this is perhaps utopia, but I'm putting it to you, have to create a broad, united front, groups of people who come from different sides of the political spectrum, okay? Political, ideological, philosophical, but with a clear awareness of what is going on, of what we are facing now. Or even if they have a vague notion of it, but with a certain intuition, more or less marked, that something is now badly wrong, that we are facing a huge problem here if we continue, and therefore this state of affairs has to be stopped. It has to be confronted head on. The time has come to put our foot down, as it were, and say no more. So against this progressive dystopia, we have to unite somehow. We must unite and come together because we simply refuse to be the people who allowed the post-humanity era to start without challenge. Because we know that post-humanity, which is what is coming next, it is coming. But even if it didn't, this era of post-modernity is a cancer. It's a cancer in our immune system of society that destroys us from within. The cancer kills you from within. It's its own. And this united front will have to bring in those from everywhere, from whatever you are in the political spectrum, from the traditional left, the old left, you know, their philosophy about social class struggle, all that fine, as well as the disenchanted, disappointed traditional classical liberals, the classical bourgeois with his ideas of prosperity and the free market and so on, but disenchanted nevertheless with the result that he sees now in front of his very eyes. And of course the traditional right, and even the far right, because it opposes what we now have, and conservatives and traditionalists of various forms, patriots, and also those who are traditionalists because they have a certain spiritual dimension that transcends even a purely religious framework, a historical framework of tradition. In a word, people with common sense. People who at this late hour still possess common sense and who are able to comprehend that beyond all these political debates going on, ideological fights, all those differences that we naturally have as human beings, different views, that beyond all that, there exists a traditional order of being and one truth of things. Because progressive dystopia does indeed progress. It progresses to the abyss. And this has to be common sense, the common denominator that will bring us together, that will unite us against this foolishness and utter nonsense. To quote Chesterton, those of us who are still capable of seeing that the grass is green. And it's amazing that we now need courage to say that, to reject this world of progressive dystopia, giving rise to neurosis and madness and insanity and anxiety and personality disorders and weakness of the soul. Full of people who are sick in the mind and sick in the body. There was a study not long ago that saying that in 10 years' time, 1 in 3 people in the West will suffer from cancer. Imagine what a pathogenic society, a pathogenic culture, where half of the people are mad and the other half are sick. An immune system disease when the body starts destroying, killing, eating itself. For traditionalists, this is a sign that the material, economic, scientific, technological progress of modernity was paid for very dearly, was paid for by the destruction of that which is most valuable, man's inner fortitude, man's inner strength. And this whole thing started long ago with the stab in the back to the old faith, the old Christian religion, back in the 16th century. That was the opening of the gate of this modernity and post-modernity. We are living with the consequences of that initial Protestant cultural and political victory. That is, we are living in that cultural hegemony that is going to take place in Europe later in the second half of the 16th century onwards, ending up in the Treaty of Westphalia. Within that cultural hegemony of ideas that derive in great measure from Protestantism and individualism, and which will be deployed for the most part where the victors were, on a territorial and within a population base of the Anglo-Germanic world, or North Europe, if you like. All right, so with that Anglo-Germanic arch contaminated already, that is the one that ended up having, they were the victors, the cultural victors, and so they are the ones who have exercised this hegemony in this modern and postmodern world. So today's world, this world that some call the cultural hegemonic, some people refer to it as the Anglosphere or perhaps Anglo-American sphere, I don't know, I suppose, was born out of subversion and soon became the cultural hegemonic arch. So what I'm saying here is that this broad united front should be formed by people who know where they're coming from, who know how the whole thing started, be they from the right, from the left, from the up, from the down, whatever, but who are aware of what they are against and what they are fighting for, people able to be together fighting in the same trench from different backgrounds. What we do not have clearly is the main thing. What alternative do we propose to radically confront and hopefully defeat this destructive, postmodern, post-humanist nonsense? We know what we have to unite against, but we are not clear on how to go about it, what the alternative is. What we know is that we cannot say, this is my alternative, this is my, no, this is mine, this is no. One first option, to come together, have the courage to stand up and be counted in terms of what we want to fight against. That's first. After, we'll have time perhaps to fight each other about other things. But to begin with, unity of purpose. And then reformulate modernity, reformulate our culture. We cannot continue to fight for our own ideology, what we come with. This is what I mean. We cannot come together only to later start fighting amongst ourselves according to our world views, the old ones. No. Those views, that political, ideological, philosophical stand that we brought to the table, those views are already poisoned, have already been poisoned with modernity and postmodernity. We have to think outside that box, the box where we've been for the last 250 years. We have to reformulate a new scenario, a different one. As I said, the modern age is a historical process of barely 300 years. That is nothing in the history of the world. But we are living the consequences of that philosophical, ideological, and political thought of 300 years, let's say. We need to reformulate, to think outside the box. And we have a unique opportunity to join forces against a common enemy and to reformulate those philosophical and political coordinates that we have to have present in order to address the future. Because if we come together to fight against post-modernity or post-humanity, for that is where we are being taken, and then each of us starts raising his own flag, and one says, look, what we have to do is to refine, retweak liberalism. People have misinterpreted liberalism. They haven't used it right. What we have to do is to get to real liberalism. And the other one says, no, what you have to do is to tweak and refine socialism, because real socialism has never been tried. Not really, not the real one. No, let's refine nationalism. That is where, that it was taking out of, no. Liberalisms, all kinds. Socialisms, all kinds. Nationalisms, all kinds. All kinds are all the offspring of that modern subversion of the old tradition that I referred to earlier. Their roots in the Enlightenment and German Romanticism, already infected with the virus of this modern delirium. Each and every one of them taking us further and further towards more and more progressivism, so-called, which is a kind of Luciferianism. I'm not joking. Well, just look at the Satanism displayed, not only in the French Olympics, under the guidance or inspiration, they say, of Brigitte Macron, who knows? That's not the only instance. All of them inverted the old truth. Changed the traditional doctrine that said clearly that the truth will make you free, and which, with that Luciferian deception, it was changed to freedom will make you true. Oh, you didn't notice? No, of course you didn't notice. None of us did. Because the moment you put there the word freedom, such a sweet word, who can go against anything against freedom? But of course. And so we stopped thinking. And we do not notice the leap and the leap and the inversion that has taken place. That inversion, that subversion, is the mother of the Enlightenment and the modern age. It started with subversion in religion and continued with subversion in culture, obviously to create this modern age and generate something completely different. Degeneracy and decadence and self-inflicted mental disease. And that has to change. But of course, we cannot go back to the past. The past is the past. Let's not make a fetish of the past. It's gone. We cannot go back to it. But we can drink from that spring. It used to be the cataracts is now but a trickle, but it's not dead. It's not dead because ultimately they won't be able to kill it, because Christ promised us it wouldn't happen. And Christianity is the civilization of Europe. And they have been busy fighting against that Christ on the cross. Some obviously rejected it outright. It was practically an insult, but others simply intellectualized the cross, sanitized it, sterilized it, anesthetized it. You just have a cross there as a symbol. Cross, two sticks, one vertical, one horizontal. A cross without Christ, indeed. Pray tell, what kind of cross is that? Whose cross? I have to drink from the old school of faith and tradition and be realists with a realism that has a profound spiritual dimension. I'll give you one example of that traditional culture, of the faith of our fathers, of the old religion. Yes, the Catholic faith of Europe, that the Vatican now is fighting against, has been completely taken over. The Vatican no longer represents the Catholic Church, punishing and excommunicating and defroking good priests, traditional priests, and promoting the degenerate. There she is, laminated, prostrated before the world. Yeah. Was taken over by its enemies a long time ago, and it became obvious in the 60s. Let's move on from that. So what I meant to say there is that there is a difference between the faith and the institution. The institution is gone. The institution that defended the doctrine, that's gone. Something else, it has to be revived. But I just want to give you an example, not of a religious nature, but of a cultural nature, of what I was saying about not being able to go to the past, but drinking at the spring of the past. Simple cultural example of that world. For example, life and death. Simple, clearest example. And how it was viewed then. And I'm not talking here in a religious sense. I'm not talking here about whether there is or there isn't an afterlife. I believe there is. And I'm not talking here either about whether there is a God and God will judge you. I believe there is, and he will. But what I'm talking here is, and this is the cultural issue, that of what that old spring of traditional knowledge can teach us, is that we have to be amenable to, realistic, and accept and confront, for example, if we're talking about life and death, the experience of disenchantment, of sorrow, of heavy-heartedness, of old age, of death, of illness, of eventualities and chance events that will change our lives, sometimes for the better, sometimes for the worse. That old finis gloriae mundi, the end of worldly glory, and that memento mori, remember that you have to die. In that old Catholic world, life and death went hand in hand. And when life and death go hand in hand, life has a spiritual meaning. And you become realistic. You look at death, old age, illness, and worldly glory right in the eye. So here we have already a key difference. The Enlightenment illusion of trying to live with its back to death. And against that, we had a memento mori. There is an absolute treasure of teachings in the past. And to remember who we truly are, where we truly come from, who our ancestors were. Because now we have a spiritual battle to create a new modernity, a new era, a new alternative to the ideologies of the last 300 years. First, start by fighting against that kingdom of decadence and degeneracy, against that kingdom of the Antichrist. That ideology that tells you that liberty will make you true, not that the truth will make you free. And then instead of fighting amongst ourselves, perhaps we'll find a common philosophical denominator, a minimum, bare minimum, able to transcend the burden that we have been carrying for the last 250 years. Perhaps we can generate something different if we drink from the past, not go back. We cannot make an idol, a fetish of the past, but we can drink of that spring to update ourselves. This is what is ahead of us. We don't have that yet. We have not yet forged that sword. The sword is still broken. It broke with, let's say, Westphalia. And it has to be reforged. That sword that has to fall and break that Gordian knot. That Gordian knot that you cannot untie goes back to Greek mythology. The Gordian knot of contemporary decadence, and that will allow us to start something else. I'll finish. I was going to talk about something else, but I think I will leave it here. Perhaps just to recap, how to unite people with different political, philosophical views. We all have different views about everything. It's part of human nature. But we need a human being to lead that is mature. And by mature, as I think I said, I mean a person who is willing. A mature person is a man who is able to go beyond himself, his own beliefs, his mental capsule where he is, in which he moves. And what we need now is leaders with maturity. The leader has to be the most mature person in the group. Mature meaning above his own individuality, able to act in a sort of almost impersonal way, completely liberated from his own ideologies and his own beliefs and his own fetishes and tastes and attachments and desires. The leaders of a broad united front have to have maturity enough to transcend their own small individual worlds. If you are to be a good leader, you have to be able to transcend your own little story, your own biography. Transcend that purely individual dimension. That is what being a mature person is, for the common good. Being above yourself. You cannot lead people towards one goal, people with different experiences and views in a broad front, if the leaders do not have an experienced, mature personality, freed and deconditioned from their own personality. And maturity is what is the least abundant quality in our modern leaders right now. The outcast, as a matter of fact, as I started saying at the beginning, is a pathologically immature person who's always in a lacking deficiency state. Why? Because he's always concerned about his own individuality, which is always lacking in something, because we are human beings, because ourselves, there is always something lacking. To the point that he's lacking so much that he tries to self-determine himself based on his deficiencies. The leader has to be has to cultivate this, let's say, above supra-individuality of his own person. Modern ideologies and modern leaders don't know anything about this. We could put it in religious terms and call it sacrifice yourself for the good of others, but that would be going too far. The ideologies of today are incapable of generating that powerful human type. And when societies function best is when they generate men in control of themselves, being able to be in control of yourself. The traditional world had an advantage. And it is that it wasn't decadent or disoriented or disjointed. And therefore, it gave you a way of action that was basically based on having inner strength and fortitude. I think I leave it there. These are the things I've been thinking about. Thank you so much. Bye-bye.